So our next speakers are going to be Jessica Smith and Jan Whalen from the University of Manchester, also in the UK. Jessica is the Creative Arts Archivist at the John Rylands Research Institute and Library at Manchester, and Jan is the Digital Preservation and Systems Manager at the University of Manchester Library, and they're going to be doing a bit of a double act about telling us about their email archive preservation workflow. And I know email is of interest to a lot of you. It's cropped up in several of these workflows, so it's clearly an area that gives people some headaches, and they're talking about how they're using Preservica and ePADD. And I can see that they've already lined up their slides. So I'm going to pass over to Jessica and Jan, if you're okay.
Thank you so much, Michael. So yeah, as Michael just said, I'm Jessica Smith, and I'm presenting today with my colleague Jan Whalen on our workflow for email archive collections. Just get my next slide up. So just a little bit of background information. The University of Manchester Library has been acquiring the email archive of indie poetry publisher Carcanet Press, in addition to its paper records, since 2012. It was initially a great piece of work by my predecessor, Fran Baker, which was a workflow for email collections, initially really with a focus on just preservation. But when we began to acquire this collection, we didn't have Preservica and ePADD, which are the two systems we're going to talk about today. ePADD hadn't been released yet when Fran started doing this. So Fran and Jan used a combination of several pieces of software and applications to achieve the same results that we're going to talk about today. The collection is stored in our digital preservation system, Preservica, and in 2021 we introduced management of the system via ePADD. So following the introduction of ePADD and the continuing accruals to the email archive, we realised that we kind of needed to update our workload for acquisition and preservation and for management. So this is the workflow we're following at present. It includes input and actions for the archivist and for the digital preservation team, of which Jan is the head. And a couple of things to note right away is that the steps here are by necessity a bit vague. In truth, we've never followed the same process exactly for bringing in email. We're doing it every 4 years. So every time there's been an improvement we've wanted to try, or we've introduced a new piece of software, or something has been amended. So we wanted this to be really flexible enough to accommodate those changes as and when, well, they occurred to us, really. So we find it's important to have this flexibility, but each of these steps, it is important to say, is it supported by additional internal guidance written by Jan or myself. I should also say this workflow represents something of an ideal. In practice, it wouldn't work at all without the input of my colleagues in the digital applications team who support our work with ePADD. They bring considerable developer and application specialist expertise to the table. Honestly, without them, I suspect I'd have got stuck at the ingest stage for ePADD. So just to echo Duncan, it's really useful to have these conversations about things that do and don't work, and also to have people around that you can talk to about them. So outside of Preservica and ePADD in this workflow, you'll see at present we're generating some checksums. We're using Paraben E3 to generate some initial reports to help us remove things that we're definitely not keeping and can identify instantly, things like calendar appointments and personal email. So Jan is going to talk a bit about acquisition in a moment, but I think the other most obvious thing to note about the workflow is that we've taken a pragmatic approach here to ingesting a preservation copy into Preservica and then using a copy for our appraisal experiments. We will remove these files once the appraisal is fully completed, but honestly, that process is probably going to take us years. So it makes sense to have a backup copy in the preservation system while we're working on it. It's also worth noting that access copies to the files will remain in ePADD because we've got no plans at the moment to use Preservica's front end for access. So I'm just going to hand over to Jan now for a little bit about Preservica and acquisition. Jan, I think you're muted.
Just trying to talk to myself while I turn the camera on. Yeah, thanks for that, Jess. So every 4 years, as Jess said, we try to acquire an accrual of Outlook emails from Carcanet. So these are created by logging into the specific email accounts and exporting required emails in the usual Outlook way. So this slide just very boringly shows a normal type of email export that you might do yourself. Jess specifies which emails we want, which individuals, and what the date frame is. So before lockdown, we used to go to Carcanet Press with a hard drive and plug into each computer and download the required PST file. But during lockdown, we couldn't do that, and we decided that we would try logging in remotely. And that proved to be just as good, in fact, a little bit more efficient than actually going there. And so we carried on doing that going forward. Some of the issues we faced at this stage were that email accounts were quite often in cached mode. So only a certain amount of the emails were on the PC and the rest was stored somewhere else on the server. So it's just a setting that you have to check, first of all, to make sure that you get everything that you want. Essentially, the download takes a long time. So checking the cache is a good idea to start off with. There's no straightforward way of selecting individual components within an Outlook mailbox. So you can't omit the calendar or the contacts, etc. You have to export the whole mailbox each time, which is again very consuming. The Outlook exports are unreliable. I couldn't really trust the network, and I couldn't really trust that I got what I wanted each time. So I ended up trying several exports and checking the size of each export. And I decided that if I did 3 and got the same size each time, I would assume that that was correct and what I was supposed to be getting. And then I could check the fixity and make sure that I got this exactly the same thing 3 times. And then I was happy with it. After that, you have to check when you do the export. If you look at the last box there, it says save the file. Outlook always, you can give your Outlook export a name, which might be backup 1 in this case. If you try and do that export again, Outlook will default to the same name again, so you can accidentally overwrite the file, which is really annoying when it takes such a long time to do. So you have to be on the ball to make sure that you rename your file each time. Once you've got the PST file, we were using Outlook itself to open it up and check that it had everything that we expected. And as soon as you do that, Outlook changes the PST file in some way, so your fixity will no longer match. So we had to make sure that I had all these extra copies so that I could open a copy, and I knew I still had a fresh copy that hadn't been touched to hand over to Jess later. So going forward, I expect to be able to dodge all these issues quite easily now that we've been through them all. But I do anticipate that there'll be emerging issues as new versions of Outlook, different types of emails, different types of network occur. There's always going to be new things to trip us up, so it's just something to be aware of. Once I've got the copies, have the next slide, Jess, please. Thank you. Once I've got the copies, I can ingest one of the copies into Preservica. And once in Preservica, a PST file is like a container file in its own right, so it doesn't need to be packaged up in any way for ingest. You can just simply ingest it into Preservica, which is quite straightforward. It does take quite a long time. If the PST file is quite big, it might take a few hours. And if there's anything wrong with the PST file and there's an error, it might take you 3 or 4 hours to get an error message from Preservica. So it's a very time-consuming process. This slide attempts to depict some of the errors and issues that we encountered when we were ingesting into Preservica. Each of them have been dealt with by Preservica. So we had a very good relationship with the Preservica support team, very good at being on the ball and taking our issues and solving them with each upgrade of Preservica. So one of the issues was, for instance, OneDrive links. If Preservica saw a OneDrive link in an email, it would consider it a threat and block the ingest. So the Preservica support team asked us how we wanted to deal with them going forward, and we decided that we would just keep the OneDrive link in there, but neutralize the link. Emoticons and emojis were a problem, so storing those required the database to be encoded differently. This was right at the beginning. Luckily, Preservica re-encoded our database to allow us to store emoticons. I've got a lot more information about that process if anyone's interested, but I thought it was a bit too much to go into here. the length of the subject header. Preservica takes the subject header of an email and uses it to name the file. So an email will be called no subject if there's no subject header .eml, and it had a limit on the length of the subject header. So if it was as long as this one you can see on the screen here, that would fail the ingest because it was too long. So we got Preservica. I think they extended the number of characters that was allowed in the subject header. And the last issue is the rooster one in the middle of the screen there, where if somebody has accidentally somehow got some kind of control character into their subject header, that will block the ingest as well. And I didn't find an easy way around this issue. I just literally had to go through the PST file, dividing it up and trying to find the offending email. It took quite a long time, but in the end, I discovered there was just this one email with that control character in the middle. So I don't know, going forward, if things like that happen, if there are a lot of them, it might cause a problem unless I can come up with some way of searching for and finding those control characters. Again, I'll know what to look for in the future when I do an ingest, but I do expect as emails going forward have different types of things in them and different types of attachment, I expect different issues to be thrown up. Have the next slide, please, Jess. So Preservica carries out a virus, fixity, metadata, content integrity checks, etc. And it also identifies any attachments, and it unpacks the PST file. So what you do is you keep the original PST file, but you can also see the folders that were in that PST file, and you can see that the structure of the PST, roughly how it might have looked in an email account. So you can see the inbox, the deleted items, the contacts, and so on. The attachments are all in a range of formats. Some might need to be migrated to a new, more preservation-friendly format, and you can have an automated preservation workflow that will carry out this migration on several files at once. So, for example, you might want all Word documents to be migrated to OpenOffice format. Preservica keeps the original and migrates the new version, and it's all kept together with the associated emails. So the last box on there, that's the properties of an actual email. And if you click view, you'd be able to read the email. Can I have the next slide, please, Jess? And just to say, you can search emails in Preservica quite well, because there's an email index. So you can use any of these terms. You can search on, you can find all the emails from one person to another person on a particular date, and it also searches the body of the email as well. So it's got quite a good search function itself. We can also add other metadata if we want to. We can add ePADD metadata file if we want to, with information about the email and the archive generally, or we can add a premise file containing the events, who ingested it, what the checksums were, etc. So you can use Preservica on its own to manage your emails in this way. We have also started to use ePADD as a way of managing our emails, because we felt that it was a better way to manage. It also allows you to appraise emails. So Jess will be going into that into more detail. Hopefully, we would like to see Preservica and ePADD working together more succinctly, rather than at the moment they're two separate processes. So that might be a possibility for the future, maybe a closer working relationship between the two. So having got a PST file into Preservica, I give a copy of that PST file to Jess, and she's going to talk now about the appraisal, management and access side of the process.
Thanks, Jan. I am going to talk about that. So just in case anybody isn't familiar with ePADD, it's an open source software which offers significant tools to assist in appraisal for email archives. It allows for labeling, restricting, bulk restricting of messages. It offers lexicon functionality, automated entity extraction and management, and it uses a custom natural language processing toolkit. It has been our experience, though, that each and every one of these processes in ePADD still requires significant human intervention and oversight, but I'm going to try and show it to you in just a second. So this is information about the ingest for ePADD. Once you've successfully installed ePADD and have Java running, you're presented with a screen that looks a bit like the screenshot on the left, where you can add some metadata and just upload your email. This first module is called Appraisal and was primarily created to assist donors in appraising their email prior to transfer to a repository. It has almost all the functionality of the processing module, which is the one I'm going to show you, which is the one that's generally used by curators and archivists. So initially on the Mbox files could be uploaded, but provided you have a license for EmailChemy, the migration software, you can now upload files in any format you like, and they're converted into Mbox within ePADD software. I've just used an Mbox file for this demo. What you're going to see is a copy of my inbox folder, which is just where I keep all my mailing lists for the things I'm signed up to. So things that hopefully I can show you. So you have the option to upload any existing metadata you'd like to include in your preservation package at this stage, things like donor agreements, finding aids. It has what we've called sidecar files. So bear with me, and here's hoping for a demo, a quick demo. I'll try and share my screen again. Hooray! Welcome to ePADD, everybody. So here is the landing page for the collection with a bunch of metadata that you can fill out manually. As you can see, I've given it a basic summary, collection ID. There's additional metadata you can add at this stage. I'll just click on it, which includes collection metadata, some EAD fields, and some premise metadata as well. Some of it is a drop-down menu, as you can see, and some of it is just a blank text field that you can add whatever you want to, which is lovely, and yet more pictures of my cats. So if we enter ePADD, get it to start up, I can show you the bunch of functionality it has for assisting in appraisal for your collection. Great, so we start from the top. Correspondence is a nice easy one. It divides you into all of the correspondence that you have in your folder, in my case, my demo collection of mailing lists. And then you can click on them, see how many are sent and received, how many are there, and you can produce some interesting charts at this stage too. In addition to this, ePADD will identify you some entities. It can bring up places it's found, people it thinks it's found, organizations. So if I were appraising, for example, for everything from the University of Liverpool, because I knew I didn't want that in my email, I'd be able to bring up all of those messages in the one place, which is lovely. Labels are the crucial functionality here. You can add different labels to say that you do and don't want things to be transferred to access modules, which are delivery and discovery. Do not transfer is the obvious one. It will tell you if it's picked up some errors, which is lovely. Cleared for release is another really useful one, but also you can create your own labels in this part of the functionality. So for example, I have sometimes labeled everything I knew was for a particular collection that we were going to transfer only to the discovery module. And then I picked up all of the email just simply using that label. So the labels are incredibly helpful, and there's plenty of flexibility there for your functionality. So image attachments, in honesty, image attachment seems to pick up mostly people's email signatures and the nice pictures they have in it, but it is useful to know they are there nonetheless. Attachments is really useful for things like Carcanet because it picks up all of the documents that have been sent back and forward. In the case of Carcanet Press, it would be things like the books that people are going to publish, which are other really important records that we want to capture and store in the preservation system. So those are both really helpful and have really good search functionality attached to them. Lexicon search is where the NLP processing I was talking about comes up, and it identifies or tries to identify things like sentiment and sensitive data. But it's not necessarily quite as, it's just not quite clever enough to do some of the things we're hoping it will do and pick up. For example, it thinks it's picked up violence in some of the mailing lists for archive communities. And now, while I'm not suggesting that doesn't exist, it's probably a bit unlikely that it's picking up the kind of data that you would be concerned about. It's probably picking up words. So if we try conflict, for example, and load up the messages, you can see the structure of the messages here that you get, but also it's picked up the word struggling in a different context. So it's not a struggle in terms of a violent struggle or a conflict. It's somebody who is struggling to do something. So whilst it is picking up the right word, it's not necessarily clever enough to say, okay, well, in this context, that word doesn't mean conflict, it means challenge. But it's interesting to know that it's there and that, you know, that we can work on it. We're also able to actually develop our own lexicon searches. So for example, I've used this to pick up all of the countries I wanted to find, or all of the Irish poets I wanted to find, and search and then produce graphs and data analysis of that data based on that lexicon search. So it is very useful, but it's probably, it needs some work, essentially. There's also a lot of great functionality in terms of verifying your checksums within here. You can add additional event metadata to the process that you want in your preservation package. And then when you're finished with all of your appraisal, which in our case is absolutely not the case, it's taken us a couple of years to appraise maybe a quarter, if we're lucky, of the entirety of the emails that we have. You can then export them as a preservation package where it will bundle all of the metadata you've put in, all of the files you'd like, all of the original files, all of the tags you've given them, and all of the sidecar files, and then it will export it as a preservation package, which can be then added to Preservica, which is lovely. So yeah, export gives you all of these different options. Search is great as well. There's a really sophisticated Boolean search functionality. You can search by person, term, entity, email address. All of the kinds of things you might need to do to bring up a specific set of records that you're looking for. So we find, as you say, we found it's bespoke, it's open source, which is lovely, and it has been incredibly helpful to us. But I would say that, again, the appraisal we're doing is all still manual. It's not clever enough to do any of this in an automated function. So I'm going to stop sharing that and bring back just to the end of my slides. Going to run with my text, apologies. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, that's it.
No, we don't mind.
No.
So, as you'll see from my text, the workflow does begin to address some of the challenges that we think we have for appraisal and management of the collection. And it does achieve it to a higher degree than we had before, which is fair. We'll continue to keep an eye on format changes and system changes, both for the institution and our institution, to make sure the workflow is still applicable. But to echo Duncan, it is good to be flexible and be able to ask ourselves if it's right to continue to do things in the same way. For example, we are going to now ingest files as inbox rather than PST. But the challenges we have at the moment really are to do with appraisal and just the sheer volume of records that we have and the volume of email that we've brought in. I'm going to echo Duncan again and say that my hope is that the huge leaps in AI that are happening at the moment will eventually be able to be of some use to us in this kind of bits of software. And I suspect that's the next place where our development work is going to be focused. So we're in the process of acquiring the next accrual of the Carcanet Press Archive in 2024. Do wish us luck with that. And thank you very much. And apologies for all of those technical issues.
Absolutely no worries, Jess. It's brave of you to do a live demo, and we can all relate, and it was interesting to see it work in the flesh. Thank you very much. I was going to say, you've been, there's a flood of quite detailed questions, I think, coming in the chat, and Jan has been answering some of them, and I'm not sure, looking at the clock, we'll have time to go through them. So I don't know if Jan, she's answered some of them. About questions around storage. The next one we had in was from Christopher, which was about the email search function. Is it the list generated dynamically, or is it fixed? Oh, okay, Jan's just answered that one. She's saying it's fixed. Thank you very much. Anyone else spot things that I haven't? The individual email content, is that available? And how does it presented? Is it presented as it was originally done, or is it presented sort of like after you've preserved it and perhaps worked on it and made some changes?
The answer again, of course, is it depends. We have recently introduced some redaction functionality to ePADD. We developed that as part of a project we did a couple of years ago, which is about to be released into the main code, which is very exciting. So the answer is you can present it as the original text, but in a lot of cases, that's not possible because you need to redact the email address or you need to redact some personal data. So for our own particular collections, they're currently closed to public access, but there are options to make them available through these bits of software, should that be needed.
Okay. Peter asks a question about whether you segment the Carcanet email archive or have it in one collection. I'm guessing you segment it by year, but perhaps I'm wrong.
We collect it segmented in different years. Yeah, we've collected 3 different accessions so far, and we're working on the 4th. But in ePADD, we have put them all into the same place. And we've made it possible to identify which folder they came from and which accession they came from. So whilst you can see that data, you can search the entirety of the collection together at the moment in the management software. In the preservation software, they are stored as separate PST files.
And I'm just going to sneak in one quick one before passing back to Sarah, which is, I'm just curious, do all these sort of conversations you've had with Preservica and the changes that they've made to their sort of ingest of email, the sort of the subject line issues that you hit and the emoticons and so on, are those changes available to everyone, or have they sort of custom built it just for you guys?
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Sorry, Jan, I was saying when you talked earlier on about the changes that Preservica had made when you discovered issues with loading up sort of emails with emoticons or very long subject headings, has that been incorporated into the Preservica product generally, or is it just kind of local configuration?
Yeah, no, it's they incorporate into each upgrade. So every time there's an upgrade, it's improved based on what we and other customers have asked for.
Okay, well, excellent. And I see William has congratulated you both on your 200th anniversary. I know you guys haven't been there from the start, but you can take some reflected glory in that. Thank you again for your presentation. It was excellent, and Jess for battling with those live demo issues. Very, very well done. I'm very appreciative, and I shall pass back to